What's up, everybody? I've got an MHA Spotlight deck profile for you featuring Ojiro 1. Ojiro 1, I think, after the Araz Ojiro 2, he might be the better. He's probably the better Ojiro now. And there's a couple cards in Spotlight that he didn't get to shine with in Standard back in the day. So let's go over the deck. First off was Ojiro Do. Flip 1 foundation. Your attack gets +3 damage. If it's blocked, your rival flips 1 foundation. Enhance once per game. This attack speed cannot be reduced, and it gets +1 speed for each of your rivals' face down foundations. This ability cannot be canceled. So throughout the game, you're going to present a bunch of high damage threats. You do have to flip a foundation for it, but if your opponent wants to block, they're going to have to flip a foundation as well. And then if they do too much foundation flipping, you can create an unblockably fast attack. So what does Ojiro have now in Spotlight that makes him shine where he might not have before? That card is Sports Festival Champ. Now, he did theoretically have access to this card for a while. This is just a set 3 card, right? But one of the cards that came along much later that makes this deck much more consistent now, much more reliable, to have access to Sports Festival Champ, which says, enhance commit, discard 1 card. The damage of this non-throw attack cannot be reduced. So you have speed that gets a big pump that can't be reduced. You have damage that can't be reduced. You can just start piling on the modifiers as much as you want. And the thing he was really kind of missing was Canister Creation Strike. Canister Creation Strike says lose 2 health, remove 1 foundation, build 1 foundation with printed difficulty X from your discard pile. X equals the removed foundation's printed difficulty +1. So, sometimes you might not have like the right chain of foundations. You can end up accidentally flipping all your 0s and 1s before your 2s, and then you can't build a Sports Festival Champ. But if you get 2 Canister Creation Strikes, you can remove a 0 to build a 1 and then remove a 1 to build a 2. So there are some interesting ways you can kind of ladder your way up there. But this is one of the things that I think makes the deck a lot more appealing now, being able to tutor the Sports Festival Champ and not necessarily have to run 4 copies of these cards, right? To increase the consistency of the deck. So that's sort of your 3-card combo. And then of course you have to find a way to actually win the game. Your rival's going to have 5 to 8 foundations, even if all of them are face down. Having a 11, 12, 13 speed move doesn't necessarily make it unblockable, even if the speed can't be reduced. So that's where we take advantage of the fact that we're a set 1 character. We're going to be playing some copies of Plus Ultra. You're definitely going to want to get some pokes in. You're going to want to be able to generate some momentum. So that way you can use Plus Ultra. Now, Plus Ultra is a first in hand. So this does not necessarily combo perfectly with wanting to set up the reduced speed and reduced damage and things like that. But Plus Ultra can force the opponent to use a speed reset on an attack where they otherwise wouldn't, and you can save your once per game, right? You can play around with what your rival has, but Plus Ultra is also just a really solid defensive piece. It is one of the things that normally stops these big one-shot, attack decks, because when you attempt to block with it, you reduce the speed of the rival attack to 0. But Ojiro's once per game makes him immune to that static ability as well. So I think Plus Ultra is going to be I think it's going to be a pretty important part of the little meta game within MHA Spotlight. There is also evading copy for like 3 specific symbols, but if you're not on an evading copy symbol, this is kind of like your ace in the whole block. And a decent amount of people would like sideboard this card just for the blocking potential, even if they weren't a set 1 character. So I think you can make great use out of Plus Ultra because you are a set 1 character and you have you basically force your rival to show their hand, to use their resources immediately after you first enhance, or else you can then turn around and say, okay, well now you're locked out, right? This might not be lethal yet, but if I use Sports Festival Champ or Ojiro, I can lock you out of, dealing with my attack in one of those 2 ways. So I think this card is definitely a necessity here, but we've also got Season the Advantage while we're in the actions. This one is going to give you that speed that Ojiro doesn't give, and then progress your flip game plan much faster. This is targeted flip, so that's super duper important. On the flip side of things, we've got split body control, which is after your attack is blocked, flip 1 rival foundation. We've got apathetic, which is a It's a 4-check and a high block, so that's why I'm splitting the different copies here. Split body control is generally just worse than apathetic. However, the deck needed some low blocks, and it's not a 4-check, so I figured that was a good balance. Traditionally, apathetic is just way better, right? We can use this on defense. If our opponent might be setting up a kill, we can, flip a foundation that either resets their attack to printed or gives them a pump that we don't want them to have. But I think that split body control being a block zone that we needed and being a 5-check made it worthwhile to bring in. But the important thing is that they are targeted flip abilities, and I knew that we'd want to have more than just 4 copies of this foundation anyways, and so I decided to go for a 3-5 split. If you want to go for 4 apathetic, you want to play a few more 4-checks, I definitely think that that is the stronger way to go than to play more copies of split body control. But I know a lot of people are going to be confused on why I didn't max out the quote unquote better one. That is why we needed more low blocks. And then on top of that, we've also got Dragon Strike. Dragon Strike is when you play it, you can play it as an attack or you can block with it. You can flip one rival foundation. Ojiro is not targeted. He just kind of adds to the face downs that your opponent is going to have from blocking. But all the other flip effects in the deck are targeted. And that was something I wanted to keep as sort of a theme, is that, we've got enough overall flip just from our character. And the fact that your opponent's going to want to be blocking these moves because they're going to be coming in for like at least 8 damage. I think pretty much all of these, like Texas Smash, you should pretty much always be comboing, right? So that one's going to be like 10 damage. Even our 4 diffs are 8 damage. So yeah, all these moves are going to be pretty big with Ojiro. Your opponent should be running out of stage pretty quick. And then to kind of cap things off, we've got pull no punches. This gives us momentum for stuff like plus ultra. It'll give us momentum for things like powerful. Dragon Strike is also a really good finishing move in this deck. Once you've got enough things flipped, EX and powerful combined is a great way to, flex your neither of these numbers can be reduced. I can now add my momentum to whichever stat I need to have. On top of that, Hardened Uppercut has EX2 as well, right? So fueling the EX for these attacks, getting the big damage bonus from our character is a great way to end the game. And Pull No Punches is also notably a incredible deadlock threat. So one of the things Ojiro can kind of struggle with is if he doesn't have a lot of aggression early and the opponent just gets to build face-ups, build face-ups, build face-ups, have 10 face-up foundations, everything's fine. It's, Release is destroying face downs as they go and stuff like that to keep them out of deadlock, which is why you need the targeted flip and stuff to force those decks into deadlock when they don't have access to Release anymore. Pull No Punches is going to pull double duty in those matches. To go along with the tech pieces here, incredible display. It's a really solid defensive ability when you've got cards like It Can't Be Fixed, or like I said, we were kind of struggling to find all the block zones to kind of be evened out the way we want in MHA Spotlight. Incredible display allows you to kind of slack off on holding multiple copies of a specific zone, and then canceling responses that will interrupt things like Sports Festival Champ. Your character ability can't be canceled, but there are other responses like Erase that can prevent you from using your character's enhances. So I think having incredible display in the main board is really, really nice there. Web of Blades, this is the only way you're ever going to try to beat like a Momo or an Eraserhead. Trying to keep all your attacks back up to printed speed is probably the best you can hope for with Web of Blades. So yeah, you're going to want to have one of these for sure. Maybe, the sideboard is kind of fake in a lot of these videos. This might be one to sideboard an additional copy of, because I do expect people to be playing characters like Eraserhead and Momo. New training method is just an all-star for early builds. It also picks up Sports Festival Champ when you check it. It picks up cards like Apathetic or You're So Obvious. Finding the specific foundation you need for a specific situation is pretty important in this deck, I think. Finding resets when you're kind of struggling defensively because your character has no real defense, and a lot of this deck is about preventing your opponent from having things, but it's not preventing your opponent from doing things. So it prevents them from having stuff sitting in their stage, but it doesn't really prevent the opponent from doing things with their attacks, right? So finding the correct foundations for when you need a deadlock threat like pull no punches, or maybe you just need something to protect your foundations like chivalrous competitor or high value target. I think new training method is an absolute all-star for smoothing out early build turns and helping you kind of ramp foundations back up in the early game, because this is not really a turn 2 deck. You absolutely can turn 2 people with the right spread of 4 diffs and good checks and cards like Hardened Jab, which, this is going to rebuy your face down foundations. This is going to ramp you resources. You pick up a committed foundation, you build a ready one. Absolutely massive for its entire lifespan, and the really good block mod, of course, too. So, finding the right foundations that you can abuse is definitely something this deck wants to do. And then our biggest issue for the deck might just be that there isn't a ton of card draw. Chivalrous Competitor is the only foundation that really draws a card here. You do get to, like I said, rebuy foundations with Hardened Jab, but this is a deck that's very much trying to stick to a specific game plan. It's not trying to generate a ton of value. Typically, you want to be able to execute a really powerful turn 2 and then maybe have like an incredibly strong turn 3 combo win. That's from generating enough flip effects to make your once per game speed pump really reliable, right? So this deck doesn't have a ton of options in the direction it can go. You can modify this deck to have a little bit more card draw, but the Earth symbol does struggle in that respect a little bit, at least in MHA Spotlight. But I think a lot of these foundations are super duper important. And again, stuff like new training method is going to be able to pick you up a +1 high block, which is the most important block zone still in MHA Spotlight. It's going to be able to fix out, your block zones and things like that. And I think you'll be all right. So in the sideboard, we just have more interaction for interaction, right? We've got Kirishima's assistance to prevent your opponent from hitting you with big breakers. +1 mid block breakers and +2 mid block breakers are pretty common in this. So sealing the whole block is really nice. Sealing stuff like Face Shield can be really nice when you're trying to pull off a Texas Smash combo. You're so obvious. We have more resets. So if you do run into decks that are punishing you with minus speed, minus damage on all your moves, and Sports Festival champion Ojiro are just, if they're doing it to every move, you can't be using those resources to protect moves on a poke turn. So You're So Obvious is here. Also just really solid defensively. Face Shield, it solves a lot of issues in the format. It hurts a lot of characters very specifically. Pretty much any character trying to play a combo attack lineup gets ruined by this. Characters that have stuff that triggers on resolution usually get ruined by this, or respond on resolution trigger. So I think that Face Shield is just a really, really solid. It's like the perfect idea of a sideboard piece. It doesn't do a whole lot in the stage, but charge and stun attacks are pretty popular in MHA. So maybe a little bit of a DR after a damage reset could save you a game, but that's also debuilding 2 foundations, so don't rely on that. Locking the Building, this one is pretty contentious. This is probably the one to drop if you're not super sure about this one. But Response Destroy, after an attack is played, that card cannot leave the card pool during the combat phase. This is super solid for a lot of the same reasons that Face Shield is. There's a few more cards now that will beat Face Shield. Usually it's on the attack themselves. But Locking the Building is really strong against Dual Needle Lunge. It's really strong against the Zero Gravity Lift decks that are out there. Asui is back on the menu. I don't know if anyone's going to play that deck. It's a little sweaty and boring, but you might run into that. And so debuild 1 to lock progressive is pretty good. It was never super popular in standard though, but I think it's because those symbols were struggling at the time. Locking the Building was coming out at a time where your decks were like a slim 60 powerhouse of cards like Snack Time and One with Nature, right? So I think it was really, and then All in Void like dropped off, or were also really specific about what they were trying to counter. So Locking the Building might be the one you drop from your sideboard to find other stuff, because just locking one card historically hasn't been good enough to really slow down a hyper aggressive card pool clearing decks. But I also do like the card pool enhance. So like you block with this, and then you can flip it in the card pool. And then you can block with a +1 mid block, and that's not terrible. you know, not a great rate. Again, debuilding yourself to play defense, but that's what this card does. So, defending pageant queen. This one's here in case you want to block a little bit more. Again, this deck doesn't have great card draw for blocking a lot, but MHA is more akin to a tempo based game where you can just sort of flip all your opponent's card draw, and then you're not drawing cards and they're not drawing cards. And so I don't think that defending pageant queen is super necessary. It's kind of in the same vein as You're So Obvious here. It's, you know, but this time it's only one-sided. So these are the two most sus sideboard cards, but I always like to put defending pageant queen on here because I think a lot of people forget this card exists. This card's insane. Putting a attack speed to 1 is, you know, incredibly good. There's not very many, you know, there's quite a few speed resets to printed, but 5 speed moves are 5 difficulty moves are 5 speed. You know, a lot of these moves are you know, that you're gonna see are gonna be 4 or 5 speed anyways. So putting things down to 1 is, I think, gonna be really, really powerful. But again, the sideboard is kind of the last thing I think about. I think these are all pretty essential cards for the main board. The attack lineup again is meant to be standalone. This is meant to be an attack lineup that you can play without really using Ojiros once per game. But when you put your opponent in the dire straits, you know, when you've had a stellar turn that starts with, you know, like a hardened jab that gets blocked, and then you have a calorie counter, and your opponent is wasting time blocking these moves because they are for 8 and 9 damage, but they're low investment, they're low risk pokes that you're going to start your turns with. And then you're going to follow up with a Texas Smash, right? And now we're going to be discarding cards, and then you're going to play a jab after that. And this jab isn't super fast, but your character can make it just fast enough, and it's wearing a Texas Smash damage bonus, and it's wearing an Ojiro damage bonus, and all of a sudden it's like 8 mid for 12, and the opponent can't block it, right? Or maybe you have a plus ultra in there, and you know, you get to make it so that the speed can't be reduced, but you doubled the damage up to like 18 or something like that. And, you know, hardened jab is really good late in a string tube. Like we talked about, it's going to reset those foundations. So you do have to be a little careful. 6 of the 18 attacks are not punches, and they are good leadoff attacks. But Texas Smash, I don't think, is really a second attack in the lineup anyways. I usually play Texas Smash 3rd or 4th. I think that was always kind of the way it went, is you use your first 2 attacks to see how much your opponent wants to play defense this turn, you know, how much they're saving in their reserves. And of course, because all your moves are super big, they don't get to wait that long. And then you punish them with the big Texas. So that's the deck I got for you guys. Let me know down in the comments below. Is this a deck you would play in Spotlight? Are you playing in Webcam Warriors? I'm going to put the Webcam Warriors sign up link in the pinned comment as well. So please check that out. It's going to be a fun time. We've got a ton of prizes from the Trading Post, Stark Dark, Response on Play, Let's Talk UVS. There's a Chrome you can win. Undefeated at Locals put up a bunch of cash. And of course, Team MJLA is going to be helping me stream it all. So come check it out November 15th. I hope to see you guys there. Peace out.